Welcome to the Gramophone Classical Music Podcast, this week with Hattie Butterworth. Earlier this year, I went on a trip to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, and whilst I was there, I met up with two members of the Dover Quartet, a group that was formed at Curtis in 2008, and who are now ensemble in residence at the Conservatoire. Curtis also has its own record label, Curtis Studio, and is releasing a new album from the quartet called Woodland Songs. The album takes its name from the work by Gerard Impechaha Tate, written for the quartet and heard at its world premiere recording. Tate is a Native American classical composer whose music embeds and expresses his native culture. Alongside Tate's work, the album also includes the renowned Dvorak American String Quartet in F major. So I'm joined today in Curtis with Camden Shaw and Joel Link from the Dover Quartet. How are you both doing today?
Wonderful, thanks.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Wonderful. Well, we're here because your new album, Woodland Songs, is coming out on the Curtis Studio label. What can you tell me about yourselves as a quartet, how the quartet started, and just the origin story? I always love to hear a quartet origin story.
Oh, well, sure, there's definitely an origin here. Actually, Brian, the other violinist in the quartet, and I met when we were kids at a I guess it's kind of like a summer camp for kids, but there were older kids as well. It doesn't quite exist anymore while it's been reintroduced, but it was called Encore School for Strings, and it was actually the Cleveland Institute of Music's summer program. And I think we were 13 when we met, and we happened to audition to Curtis at the same time. We were friends at the time, and we were both excited about auditioning, and we both got in the same year. And when we got to school, we started playing together because we didn't know a lot of people, of course, and which is always how it begins at school. You play with your friends, and then you kind of... I think for us, there was always this, we were in a very serious quartet for a bit of time, but then our Dover's cellist and at our previous violist, Milena, they entered in 2006, the year after we came in. I think we'd always admired them from afar, but we were in a very serious, committed group and doing this stuff. But then eventually our cellist and violist graduated and left the school, so we were left with no bottom. As we say, we were a bottomless quartet, and we were seeking our pants. So we found, we of course had always been admiring them from afar, and we kind of mutually, they were kind of also left in a situation where they had been playing with some people and they didn't have violins anymore. So this kind of natural marriage happened, I suppose. And that's really the origin of how the quartet got started. And we were fortunate to have wonderful coaches and mentors along the way who really encouraged us to give it a shot and said things like, oh, I think, I've been doing this for a long time, and I really think you guys would have the potential to do this for a lifetime if you chose to really kind of commit. So I think we took that very seriously, and we were really excited by the support. Okay.
So this new album that we're talking about, tell me about your recording history as a quartet. Tell me about the previous stuff you've done, or the most kind of notable stuff you've done, and maybe how this new album is signifying a shift or a new journey?
Absolutely. So, yeah, our first album ever was recorded just downstairs, actually, from where we're sitting. And we wanted to do some connection to the Guarneri Quartet because we'd studied with various members a fair amount and really grew up responding emotionally very deeply to their recordings. And so our first album was actually all Mozart. And we did 2 of the 3 Prussian quartets, and then recorded a viola quintet with Michael Tree, of course, the violist of Guarneri. And that was a really meaningful project. But also, kind of solidly in this old school repertoire, starting with Mozart is definitely a statement, especially these days in a way. And we've had various projects then recording the Schumann quartets, all 3 of those, and then did a really, really big project doing all of the Beethoven quartets, which spanned 3 years, of course. And there were some other much more modern projects in between. We recorded Andy Akiho's incredible suite called Lignius, which is a really, really difficult and experimental and just, frankly, kind of genius marimba and string quartet work. And actually, as a weird point of fact, we're playing a movement from that this week in New York again, which will be fun. So there were other projects, but in terms of Dover-directed things, most of the projects had been very sort of old-fashioned repertoire based, you could say. And we really did, especially after doing something like all of the Beethovens, we had this thirst for doing something from a different angle. And there were a lot of vectors that sort of combined to produce this album, and it took years for it to become a reality. So, I mean, the first discussions about something like this started probably 5 years ago. And actually, as in terms of how this came to be, I mean, one of the inspiring vectors was that we wanted to record something that would be great for young musicians. And the Dvorak American is one of the most sought after pieces of music for young players because it's fairly straightforward in some ways. It's hard to get lost playing it. But every single part has an incredible amount of soloistic expression. There are a lot of exciting rhythmic elements. It's stylistically tantalizing and it's fun, basically, but it's also emotionally quite deep and expressive in the slow movement. So it's just the perfect piece, and for a lot of players, I think it's their first string quartet, actually. A lot of people play it in middle school or high school, and it's kind of their gateway drug to quartet. So we wanted to record that, but also we wanted to explore the history behind the piece and also kind of expand upon that. And that's where this album really took shape. So another one of the vectors was that my aunt is a language revitalizationist with the Smithsonian, and she specializes in American indigenous peoples and had worked with a lot of tribes in Oklahoma. And she gave my family the CD of this group of indigenous women. The group is called Ulali, U-L-A-L-I. Incredible musicians and singers, and drawing on their roots, but also very, very openly inspired by a lot of different types of music. And that album, the album's called Mach G. It's really worth listening to. I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast is really into music, so they should really. It's just phenomenal music in every way. And so growing up listening to that, it was very, very inspiring, and it kind of seemed like there was an opportunity to explore this connection between music of the Americas that was already here and then Dvorak's inspiration and how tied together those were. And the only missing component was a living composer.
So Jared Tate, he ended up being the link. What can you tell me about your connection with him and how you ended up working together on this?
You know, the funny thing is we actually weren't connected at all, and we met him essentially by recommendation through our producer, and who also became kind of the engineer towards the end of the project of our Beethoven cycle, and our producer also for the Schumann album that we did. And his name is Alan Bice. He actually works in Cleveland, and we were always recording in this Indiana space at a college. And when we were kind of talking about you sit and talk on a break, and he was talking about, I've run into this composer, or I've known this guy for a long time, and he's really amazing, and what he does is really it's really effective, and I think that you guys would be really amazing working with him and all that stuff. So we kind of pulled at that thread, and it kind of connected to a lot of other connections that particularly Camden had in his life. So it felt like pretty natural.
What can you tell me about Jared and his style, his influences?
Man, I don't know a tremendous amount, honestly, about his influences, but I do know that he definitely draws from a very... he draws a lot on his heritage, and I think his music is very based on his being, a Native American indigenous person, and I think he finds a lot of solace in that, and is a very big proponent of sharing that with everybody. But what I really appreciate is it's not in this way that he's forcing it on anyone. He's very open to the experience and just wants people who are very open to what he's sharing, and I think it's. He does it in such a really beautiful and graceful way, and he's such a wonderfully kind and what's the really right word for it? He's really, really warm, but also very direct in a way that's really refreshing. And I don't mean that in any kind of veiled way to say anything else. He's just, you know what he's looking for, you know what he wants, you understand what he's asking for, and he's not complicated in that sense. So it's actually a real joy to be able to work with someone who is so in tune with himself through his artistic expression and also through his person.
Sounds like he's just a very good communicator.
Yeah, he took a lot of, if we were like, oh, this is difficult and we would suggest this, he took a lot of our suggestions that made our lives easier, but he also felt were really important. And sometimes he kind of put his foot down, like, I get that this is really difficult, but this I feel pretty strongly about. So I felt like he had a really healthy balance of working with the musicians and really trusting you to bring what you do best to what he's already done, but also being open to the fact of, like, sometimes I'm going to say no and I feel strongly about stuff and I feel comfortable to do that. So it creates a very honest and I think clear and respectful working relationship, which is really important when you're going through this kind of process.
So the title tracks, or the title work, is this Woodland Songs piece, which, am I right in thinking that you premiered last year, the world premiere? Tell me about working on that commission, and what can you tell me about just the piece itself for Quartet?
Well, again, Jared has taken inspiration from his heritage, and he wanted it to be a multi-movement work, so to have this sense of pretty large form, it could be an ender on a program, for instance. And so there are 5 movements, and each one is inspired by a clan that's part of his Chickasaw larger tribe. These clans also, it's interesting because the names of the animals, we can picture their personalities as animals, but also for him they have further connotations because of the clans that they represent. But there's a very strong sense of that animal's character, and in some ways it will feel familiar, like the movement titled Deer, for instance, has this sort of pensive serenity and depth of presence that's really strong. The fish movement is kind of surprising in a way because you sense this shimmering feeling that sometimes it's a little out of view, but it's beguiling and sort of attractive, and other times it's really roaring, like you're swimming in rapids or something. And so there's a big spectrum in some of the characters, but it's really, I think I hope I'm not misconstruing his point of view, but I love listening to him talk about the more rabid animals. Like, he gets very excited talking about squirrel and raccoon and how just like, a pain in the rear they can be as animals. They're getting into everything. They're tearing everything apart. And Jared really, I think that resonates with him, actually, because he has so much energy naturally that he really does. And his raccoon clan is his family clan, so that for him, feels the most close to home. But it's a wonderful spectrum of experiences within the work, and in many ways is very classical. And actually, Jared introduces himself always as a Chickasaw classical composer, in the sense that he likes long form, he likes storytelling through form, and writing for these instruments, but there's something just obviously fresh and exciting about the writing too.
What was the experience of premiering it, and did you feel a certain vibe in the concert hall when you were performing it for the first time? What was that feeling, and what was the feedback kind of from the audience?
I think it's always gotten really great feedback. I think certainly from the performer side, I feel like it's grown a lot through our getting to know it better. And of course, when you're first premiering a piece, it's in a way it's kind of unfortunate because every piece has to start somewhere, but it feels like it really grows and becomes something that you understand. No matter how much rehearsing and preparing you do, there's a certain kind of learning that's only done through concerts. And I think it's been fun to see that grow and change, and even like Jared has come to concerts along the way and been like, oh, I want to change this or I want to change that, right? So it's like even the piece itself, while it's premiered, it's always it's kind of a living, breathing work as long as the composer's alive and showing up to premieres or showing up to concerts, I guess, that you play. But I feel generally, actually not even generally, I feel like pretty much all across the board, people have really loved the piece and felt like it really communicates something very strong, which is exactly, I think, what he's going for, and certainly why we wanted to work with him. So it feels like it kind of caps everything off as a very fulfilling and successful endeavor.
And we move on the album to an arrangement that he did of these Eulalie pieces, which I guess aren't particularly classical, whereas his vibe is generally classical. How did you kind of communicate what you wanted this arrangement to be, or did you not really, or did you sort of let him run with it?
I think we gave him total agency with that, because he actually knows Pour Fée, the composer really of those rattle songs, and we also wanted her to feel excited about the project and that she was included as much as she wanted to be. So it felt right to have Jared, talk with her about it. She was excited about the project, which is great. And he was then, I think, through her, given the blessing to kind of not only transcribe, but also feel that he's expressing the instrumentation and his imagination fully as well. So it's not a transcription in the sense that, if Joel or I were to listen to the album and literally try to copy everything, as a composer, he's able to convey the same message with little changes here and there, and maybe make it work even better for strings. And I think one of the challenges that he dealt with really well is trying to convey this the shell-shaking sound that was part of this Tuscaroran heritage of Pour Fée in the instruments, because we're not percussive instruments naturally, but there are techniques that you can use to convey that. But there's also this sort of, with the shell shaking, with these rattle songs, the obvious thread is just that there's a constancy of rhythm and of groove, and so his way of showing that in different moods is really effective. And right from the first notes, well, I mean, we're just in the process right now of editing the album too, and it's like you hear the first notes of the rattle songs, and this just kind of repeated note that sneaks in out of nothing on the cello, and it's really cool. It's a great arrangement, and
so it's sort of without extended technique. It's kind of within what
totally
the instrument generally can do.
Yeah,
but finding a new way of kind of showing that color.
Absolutely,
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. The Dvorak American Quartet is a thing. Tell me about this quartet, what it means for you, what it means for most quartets or string players, and then we can go on to talk about why it's on this album and how it connects to the other music.
Yeah, I think Dvorak's American Quartet is one of, when you think of a string quartet and what kind of piece it would be, maybe one of the most iconic. I think that's easily in the top 5 that people think about, and certainly the most popular Dvorak quartet that he wrote for the string quartet. It's also something that students play all the time, right? So it's something you grow up hearing when you're young, and maybe it might even be something that harkens back to your very first chamber music experience. What does it mean? I mean, I think that piece really manages to capture a really wide gamut of emotion, I think. But there's something in that piece that never feels like it's going to go to a very dark place. Even though there's a lot of the second movement, for example, is quite dark and very, very sad and very brooding. But at the same time, there's this feeling of a lot of joy. And I think it captures, the kind of bohemian heritage and that whole nature of Dvorak's so wonderfully. And obviously, he was in the States when he wrote it, and so it's a piece I think Americans have also taken to in a strong way to kind of feel like it helped them identify, their sound, right? Which is kind of the history of that piece is that there was a wealthy patron who kind of hired Dvorak to come to the States to help us find our identity here through music. So I think that's something really special about the piece, and it's something we don't talk about tremendously with that piece. We know he lived here, we know he did a lot of things, but we didn't always talk about the fact that he was coming here to help us find our identity. And people always ask, oh, did he really create the American sound, or what was it? But I think the answer is that he was always trying to find things that were here already and just tried to, through maybe a bohemian lens. But he found Americana through his own kind of Eastern European, view. And I think, he obviously created something really special and something that really resonates with a tremendous amount of people. So a special piece.
And there's a kind of, well, at least when he was here, I've read that he was also very interested in African American spirituals and Native American folk song and things like that. Was that the immediate connection for you with the Jared Tate and the American Quartet? Like, what was it about the American Quartet that you felt why you wanted to pair it with Jared's stuff?
It really was that thread of connection, and knowing that Dvorak was so inspired by some of those elements that he heard, and really, what that quartet represents is this beautiful synthesis of a lot of voices and a lot of histories that go back. Actually, Jared just said this the other day. We had an interview together, and he said something so profound. He said, "Everyone is from an ancient culture." And that really hit me so deeply. But it's true. These threads of style and of substance go back so long. Including these spirituals. That whatever emotional and musical things led to that go back thousands of years, not just tens or hundreds. So it's amazing that Dvorak was able to synthesize all of these things into sort of the American dream of hopefully of all these different voices coming together and being better for it. But one thing that actually it sounds funny, but the Dvorak American reminds me of is pizza, and it but in the sense that it's hard for us to imagine pizza. It just seems so Italian, right? Or like tomato sauce seems so Italian that it's like, how could that is the essence of Italian food. But actually, tomatoes were not native to Europe at all, and they weren't brought to Europe until people went and unfortunately plundered South America. But that essence was so convincing as being Italian that now we forget where tomatoes are from. And I think that's the minor tragedy of the Dvorak American is it's so powerful in its own right and so ubiquitous now that we've forgotten what elements led to its existence in the first place. And so this album is kind of just a happy reminder of what that piece means and where it comes from. And I do think that when you listen to it side by side with these other pieces, you listen in a different way, of course. How could you not? And you hear elements that tie the whole project together.
The American is so often taken on by students. It's not the world's most complicated quartet by a long shot. How do you bring it onto record with a sound and a vibrancy? What are the challenges of that? Are there any challenges to the American, or is it actually quite straightforward?
It's a difficult piece in its own. It's kind of like playing anything, even that seems kind of outwardly or on the surface not so complicated, but to do it well. Play a good Twinkle Twinkle Little Star actually is actually quite a challenge, certainly when you're laying it down. So I think there is a certain kind of pressure that exists with that, and it's so ubiquitous. And I kind of liken it to solo Bach for any instrument. It's one of the most difficult things to play for an audition or for a teacher, because everybody has a take and an opinion, and everyone has some very strong feeling towards it. And I think the same with this piece. So I think for us it was, I don't know, at least I'll say my approach going in it was to just feel like it was a platform to express ourselves as we feel most comfortable, and kind of no holds barred, just to kind of really latch on to what you do and to feel as artistic as you feel comfortable, and to just, kind of express yourself in a way that feels natural and not really think about all the, the rest is noise, as they say. So I think that was really, that's maybe the most challenging part is that. But the good thing is we have recorded enough that I feel like there used to be, for me at least, there was this kind of, oh my gosh, I don't really want to record, and it's so scary and it's on there forever. But we had a really good piece of advice from a friend who said, a recording is nothing more than a snapshot of how you're playing that day at that time. It's really nothing more than that. So just, I think to kind of take it in stride and to not take yourself too seriously in that sense, while of course having the attention to detail and caring, of course, about what you're laying down. So finding that healthy balance.
And the formation of the quartet as a whole obviously happened quite a long time ago. You've had one shift with the violist, but the rest of the quartet has been a real kind of constant in your lives through, I guess, what are quite formative years as well. What can you tell me about building that relationship? Has it been a struggle? Has it been... What do we not hear, really, about this relationship of a quartet and how it changes throughout the years?
Well, I think we had both the advantage and the disadvantage of forming the quartet when we were quite young, when we were teenagers. There are obvious advantages. Your playing and your sensibilities about music grow closer because you're growing up together, essentially. There are musical challenges because you have less diversity of thought through that whole process. So compared to a quartet that's coming from 4 really wildly different backgrounds, they could have perhaps a more colorful set of ideas, but maybe less automatic cohesiveness. And then personally, I mean, the again, it's kind of this double-edged sword where because of the outsized gravity of childhood in everyone's mind, it feels as though we've been together much longer than, I mean, we've been together now 17, going on 18 years, but that feels different even than if we had formed in our late 30s for 17 years. Obviously, those years go by real fast, as any middle-aged person will say. So it feels very, very potent in our lives. But I think one of the things I've noticed, just speaking to the relationship aspect, is that getting older is such a privilege because we slowly have become kinder and kinder to each other, more patient, more understanding of our differences, and truly, it sounds like a cliche, but honestly, it's genuine harvesting and appreciating each other's talents, what they bring to the table, instead of feeling like someone else's talent is your insecurity. When we're young, that's just as, and you see it teaching all the time it's very difficult for that not to be the case as a teenager. But I'm very proud to say that honestly, after this time, it feels so much more healthy and wholesome, and I kind of think of it like a hobby now, to be honest. It's like, oh, we're gonna go to rehearsal now and work on this. That's awesome. Like, so it's but to be in that position is truly a privilege, honestly.
Do you have a perspective, Joel, on it? Or
No, I actually really agree with what he said. I do think that, there are always challenges along the way whenever you're inextricably linked to 3 other people in your life. Especially as you become an adult, you have more adult problems and you have more adult perspective and more, your life is always kind of doing different things. But, we're all here because we want to be here. And I think that's, the quartet will only work as long as that happens. And I think that's, it's true. I think we've come to understand and respect and know how to give people the right kinds of space and things like that over the years. Which just makes it a much more pleasant experience. And, life is too short to live in a place where it's really miserable. So I think, there's so many joys on the road. Obviously, the concerts are one of the main things that make it worth it. It's really nice when you can kind of have the personal aspect also falling in line there, too.
I'm just quite curious about the work you do at Curtis, and how, you kind of view that role as a resident quartet. Tell me about working with students and passing on your expertise.
Yeah, honestly, it's a really humbling experience because obviously at a place like the Curtis Institute of Music, the kids play really, really well, and a lot of them are capable of already having, in some kind of way, shape, or form, an international performing career. So in a way, there's a lot of responsibility. I like to view it as helping instill really talented kids that can do essentially anything they want on the instrument with a really healthy set of musical morality of values, if that makes sense. So instilling in them what has been successful for us, but not only success is a measure of your moral health. It's a matter of being able to be able to defend your ideas in the public marketplace of ideas, right? And I think that's something that you learn in a quartet better than in anything else. Because every day that I come up with an idea and I have the chutzpah to tell my colleagues that this is the idea that I really think we should be doing, invariably I have 3 people who say, well, why, right? If they don't already understand why, and which a lot of the times, of course, they do, or maybe you're kind of going off the deep end, or you have a particular different thing that you want to do this time, you have to be able to not just say it feels right, right? You have to be able to, feeling right is not necessarily a problem, but you have to be able to defend it with something, because if not, and it doesn't feel right to somebody else, why my way? Because it feels right for me. So I think, I know certainly when I was young, a lot of things that I did, or maybe everything I did felt right, when you play, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or that it's strong or that it's respectable. So I think, that's really my perspective, I think, in coaching, is to just provide people with knowledge of how to be able to have an intellectual and thoughtful approach to making music, because a lot of it is emotional, but we do need to have our minds about us while we do it as well. And I think that's always been present in the artists that I love the most. It's not a random experience. Hopefully it's spontaneous, but that's not random. It's different. So I love what we do here. It's really inspiring. In a way, sometimes coaching gets to feel like you're like the fun uncle, because you're not 100% responsible for everything in their playing. And if you see something, you can kind of let that go and talk about the bigger picture stuff, and someone else will go in and micromanage and work on that. But for us, we just get to talk about the stuff that's I think we've always been passionate about. So
I love that. I love seeing you as a fun uncle. That's really nice. Well, it's been so lovely to catch up about this, and thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. What can you tell me about what's coming up, just briefly, for the quartet?
Well, this week we're doing a really cool project at Lincoln Center, where we're playing, I guess, 4 new works with 3 collaborators. Actually, all of whom we've worked with before, just incredible musicians. We're playing with Andy Akiho's incredible Lignia Suite, one of the movements, with Ian Rosenbaum of Sandbox Percussion, which their ensemble has recently really blown up with doing the soundtrack to Wild Robot. But I mean, Ian is just like one of those musicians that for me, I'm just astounded by his ability, and also the way that he's able to work with other people, because we're often out of our depth when we're working on stuff with him, and he's so just calm and just so helpful in this really, really challenging rhythmic music. We're playing with Bridget Kibbe, the amazing harpist, doing a beautiful piece we've never done before, Sebastian Courier, and also playing with the clarinetist Romy. How do you pronounce her last name? Deguise Langlois, an old friend of ours whose last name I never say. But playing a Pierre Jalbert quintet as well. And that's going to be really, really fun. We just finished up a project with Edgar Meyer, the bassist that we play with quite often, and we're going to China for the first time in early May. So there's a lot of fun things in the recent rear view and up ahead, and just kind of living 2 days at a time in the middle of it all.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today, and I really look forward to watching the success of the album and seeing where you go next.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
That was the last movement of Dvorak's American String Quartet, performed by the Dover Quartet and out now on the Curtis Studio label. Thank you for listening to the Gramophone Classical Music Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating or review and join us next week when James Jolly will be speaking to the cellist Elisa Weilerstein.